My guest on this episode of Suit Up is Blake Brewer. After Blake's freshman year of college, he experienced something none of us should have to. He witnessed the death of his father during an outing on the ocean in Hawaii. Out of that tragedy, though, Blake and his siblings received a gift from their father that Blake is attempting to pass on to all fathers, the Legacy Letter Challenge. Blake started by talking about growing up.
Yeah, so I was born in Shreveport, and both my mom and dad are from Louisiana. So, some people say, oh, man, you must be a Cajun. I'm like, man, North Louisiana is way different than South Louisiana. But in second grade, my dad got a job transfer to Texas. And so I actually grew up in Allen, Texas, which is where Kyler Murray is from, Allen High School.
The ill-fated stadium in Allen.
Yeah. They had to shut it down or, rework it. But, the most expensive stadium ever, I guess. Mm-hmm. But then in 10th grade, my dad got a job transfer and started working for Hillcrest as an administrator up here in Tulsa. So I actually graduated high school in Sand Springs. But we were, I had a younger sister, a younger brother, and we were kind of an all-American family, it seemed like. We were eating dinner together every night. My mom was cooking. My dad was a little bit. And then we were at church on Sunday morning. And so I have a lot of memories of my dad reading the Bible before he went to bed at night. I mean, that's just kind of who we were. Like, I knew that, as a family, we followed God.
Mm-hmm. Now, depending on the kind of church that you grew up in and whether baptism was important or not, were you baptized at a certain point as a young man?
Yeah, so in fourth grade. And so my parents had told me, hey, before that, like, you're too young. We want to make sure that you really understand this. And I remember in fourth grade, I went to my dad and I said, Dad, I think I'm ready, to make a decision. And I remember my sister and I were on her bedroom, and for a whole week straight, my dad, was walking us through Bible verses. And then we went to meet with the preacher. And I knew it was a big deal, like, for my dad to take off work for us to go meet with the pastor. Like, this was important. And then the pastor started asking us some questions about, salvation and understanding it. And I said, man, I don't know. I can't remember what the question was, but my dad looked at me and was like, you do too know that. We've been going over that the last 3 days. I think I kind of embarrassed him. Yeah, so we, fourth grade, ended up getting baptized.
So your dad was a college football player and played at Louisiana Tech. Yeah. So talk about growing up in a house with a former college athlete and how important were athletics in your life growing up?
Well, yeah, so my dad, was tight end for Terry Bradshaw. And so that was kind of my claim to fame growing up, and especially, with Terry Bradshaw was on TV every Sunday morning doing the pregame stuff. Mm-hmm. So I was like, oh, yeah, that was my dad's roommate and best friend. But, my dad loved football. And so in Allen, the earliest you can play tackle football is third grade. So I remember second grade looking at the sign for sign-ups and saying, next year, third grade, I get to go play. And then my dad was my football coach in elementary school, and he was loving it. I was loving it. We almost won the Super Bowl one year, and then, but I never felt pressure from my dad. There's one thing I appreciate about him. I never felt pressure to be as good at football as him. And the thing was, I was good at football, but I wasn't as big as him. Mm-hmm. And so I did well, but just I didn't get a lot of college looks or anything like that. Just
football? Did you play basketball, baseball, anything else along the way?
Church league basketball.
Okay.
And then
that can be rough.
Yeah. And then I did play baseball, and I loved playing baseball. And then about 10th grade, when the pitcher started throwing a curveball, I started having some issues, and so I said, I'm just going to stick with football.
You were bailing out of the batter's box, and they were calling a strike, and you're like, how in the world? That was coming at my face.
I know. Honestly, I regret. I wish I still would have played. In 9th grade, I hit, for the first time, hit some home runs over the fence. And, man, it was like the greatest feeling in the world. And I felt so much confidence. Then 10th grade comes, and they were throwing – I couldn't even hit the ball. I was so scared to go up to the plate. I mean, it was horrible.
So competitive, though, with your brother and sister growing up? Or was it just too many years in between?
My brother was too young. My sister was young, 1 year below. And I made her go out there and play with me. And she was my quarterback, and she would throw me the ball. And she was pretty good for a girl. And so, yeah, we played games where, tackled the man with the football with the neighborhood kids. And, yeah, it was competitive.
So let's talk about the main reason why you're here, if you will. And I know you've retold this story enough over the years, but man, it's tragic, but it will, at least every time I've even repeated your story to other people, I get shivers when I tell it. So I can't imagine with you telling the story. But if you will, how did the Legacy Letter Challenge come about?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I am on a mission to help 1 million dads write at least one well-written, meaningful, lasting legacy letter to their children. And it all starts with a letter that my dad wrote me when I was 19 years old. So I just finished my freshman year over at the University of Arkansas, and I got a call from my parents saying we're going to Hawaii. And so we headed to Hawaii on a family trip. And the first morning that we were there, we were at a place called Hanauma Bay, and we decided to go snorkeling. And my dad and I ended up out in the water. It was just me and him. And my dad had just told me, he said, "Man, I'm so glad that you're out here with me." And man, all was right in the world. Me and my dad looking at the beautiful fish and saw a sea turtle. Well, we kept going further out. We ended up in an area that I now know is called Witch's Brew. And the water got really treacherous. And so I put my head out of the water and I noticed that I didn't see my dad. And so I started scanning the water, and I saw him, and I could tell that he was in trouble. And my dad started yelling for help. And my dad had a deep, booming voice, and this cry for help was like a whimper. And so I did my best to get to him as fast as I could, and by the time I got to my dad, he was underneath the water, unconscious. And so I knew at that point this was serious, and I got to get my dad to shore. And so I put my arms around my dad and just started swimming with him. At this point, I was pretty tired myself, and I was already having thoughts of, man, I don't know how I'm going to make this. The shore was not close to us. And luckily, a nearby snorkeler showed up, and he helped me get my dad to shore. And to be honest, if he hadn't showed up, I think I would have drowned. So they get my dad to shore, and the lifeguards started doing CPR to my dad. And I'm really on my hands and knees next to my dad, just praying, like, God, would you please save my dad's life? And Kevin, in the moment, I was thinking, surely at any moment my dad's eyes are just going to open up and the water is going to gurgle out of his mouth, just like you see in the movies. But it never happened, and my dad ended up drowning. And so in a matter of moments, I was having one of the best times of my life, and now it had gone to the worst. And so as you can imagine, I was just devastated. I was in shock. And then it was a couple hours later that we're back in the condo, and I'm in the back bedroom sitting on the edge of the bed, still in shock. And my mom appears in the doorway, and she said, "Blake, I've found something in your dad's briefcase that he was going to give you on this trip." I had no idea what she was talking about, but she walked across the room and put into my hand several sheets of paper. And at the top it said, "Dear Blake, Natalie, and Marcus." And she said, "For the last 2 months, your dad has been writing a letter to you guys, and here's your copy." And so I began reading this letter where my dad just was sharing his heart and sharing his feelings about us and giving us some great life advice. When he wrote this letter, he had no idea that it was going to be his last words to us, but essentially that's what it was. And I got to the last line of this letter, and only God could have allowed my dad to write this, but my dad wrote, "As you are being faithful to God, you're often going to find yourself in the minority. But I can assure you that in heaven, you'll be in the majority. Love your dear old dad in Christ Jesus." And it was at that moment that I just felt a peace, because like, man, my dad is in heaven right now. And I've even joked with people that if given the option, if God had said, "Hey, Larry, do you want to go back to earth?" he would have said, "Heck no. I'll just stay right up here and wait on them." And so really for the next year of my life, I was grieving really hard. But that I just found so much comfort in that letter and the words that my dad wrote. And it just gave me hope. Like, I'm going to make it through this. And then really for the last 18 years, as I graduated college and started my career and got married and had kids, my dad's letter has been there, and his words have been guiding me ever since.
When did the inspiration come for your efforts in trying to get people like me? Because you have a 6'4" and 1-year-old. Mine are 41.
Kevin, how old are you? You must be young. You started young, huh?
Yeah. 41, and then that's a stepdaughter, and then I've got a 29 and a 27-year-old, but I also have a 21 and a 19-year-old grandsons as well, and hopefully, Lord willing, we'll continue to multiply that grandchildren number as my daughter is getting married this year. But where did the inspiration come to do this organized effort?
Well, it was a couple years ago, and I went to write a letter to my children. You know, if anyone knows the value of a letter from their dad, it's me. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the number one reason, I don't know when my last day on this planet is going to be, so I want to make sure and have something written down for them. But then the second thing is I see the world that they're growing up in, and the number of people through social media and the internet that are speaking into their life, and the world is just screaming at our children, hey, come do it my way. And I don't want my children to do it the way of the world. I want them to do it. I want them to hear my voice and my wife's voice and know what our values are. And so I know that one way to be very clear on that and to really compete with the world is to write a letter and to write this to them. And so I went to write this letter, and man, it was hard. Like, just to get my thoughts organized around this, and, you know, you're staring at this blank sheet of paper, and what am I going to write? And it was just hanging over my head. And then at the exact same time, God kept bringing men into my life that had a letter from their dad that changed their life. One of the guys is a guy named Marx. And Victor is doing great things around the world. Has a nonprofit, gets a letter from his dad at 25 years old from his biological dad that he doesn't even know. He was raised by like 3 or 4 stepfathers who abused him and beat him. One of them left him in a freezer to die, and his biological dad writes him this letter, and it starts off, "Dear son." And Victor tells the story. He says, "Dear son, who the heck does this man think he is?" Like, he was ticked. He's like, he didn't have the right to call me that. What had happened was his dad had become a Christian, and his life had changed, and he wanted to reconcile with his son, and he wanted to share the gospel with Victor. So he writes this letter. And the long story short is Victor gave him a chance and goes and meets with him. They end up becoming best friends, and Victor, his life completely changes because of this letter. So I'm hearing this, and I'm like, man, I got a letter from my dad. Another guy, Pete Vargas, God brings him into my life. I'm hearing him speak. He has a letter from his dad. And it's like God spoke to me in that moment and said, Blake, you got to help more people get a letter from their dad. And you got to help dads write the letter. And so that's what started us on the mission. And I tell dads, you have a letter that's in your heart. And so through this process, we're going to get the letter out of your heart to your mind to a piece of paper. And then there's some things that every person needs to hear from their dad. And we're going to make sure all of those things are in the letter as well.
Let me ask you this about the letter, just because I know that if I would have written that letter, 20 years ago, to my children, who would have been really young at the time, and I would have been, 20 years younger without that life experience. Is it something that changes then? Do you write one letter and that's it, or do you write more letters as you get older and life changes, for not only the letter writer but also the person who's going to be receiving the letter as well?
Yeah, great question. Well, so I get asked all the time, what's the best age for my kids to write them a letter? And I say that, the best age is the day that your children were born, and the second best day is now. And then, absolutely, as your children get older, you'll know them better. Their personalities will change, their life circumstances, and so and yours as well, and the wisdom that you have. And so I say, let's just get one down. Let's get one written down.
Let's start.
So they have something written down from you. And then as they grow older, some dads, they do one every year. I don't start off saying that to a dad that they should do that, because that could be overwhelming when you've never done one.
Yeah.
But I say, maybe do one, and then as your children have hit different milestones, whether they're becoming a teenager or graduating or getting married or becoming a parent. Those are great times to write a letter.
Is it something, though, and I'm not trying to unveil any secrets here, but is it something that you deliver at that time, or do you hold those, and then it's in a safety deposit box somewhere that'll be revealed to the recipient at a later date?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I tell dads, it's up to you. This is your letter, so you can give it when you want. My dad wrote my letter, and he was going to give it to me on that trip because he knew the power of his words. And as a 19-year-old, man, I needed my dad's influence and his words in my life. And so, I say this letter, the things that you've written on this page. And, some dads will write using the kind of the blueprint that I have, they'll write 20 pages. And some dads will write 1 page. And I'm like, man, let's just, it doesn't matter the length. This is your letter. Your children are hearing, from your heart. You're being authentic. You could have misspelled words. It really doesn't matter. Like, your kids don't matter. They would just, want something written down. And so I say it's so powerful what you've written. And that your children have a decision next week, 6 months from now, a year from now, and you want to help influence that decision. And so I say give it as soon as you can, sooner than later.
All right, let's talk about how people can get signed up. You have a website. And let me also say this, too, because you've mentioned it already. My wife's an English teacher, and so I grew up. I've been married for 30 years, so she did raise me to some degree. But in this atmosphere of, speaking correctly, and even though I speak for a living, and writing correctly as well, there is this idea that things you want them to be able to be organized, and some people will see maybe the instructions that they get and go, well, that's how I was going to do it anyway, and so now I know. I'm glad I got confirmation on how I was going to do it. But other people, you're right, they don't even know where to begin, and that's where you guys come in.
Yeah, so I've got an online course that has 10 different steps, and there's me on video leading you through it, and then some dads join me live through it. And so there's some different price points there, but around $100 to go through it. And what I tell dads, I have a money back guarantee. Like if I don't help you write a better letter than what you would have written on your own, man, money back. And so I haven't had one person yet, and I've helped dads who are an author, and I've helped people who are not writers at all. And so it really doesn't matter. There's something there with just having that blueprint and not forgetting something. That's what a lot of dads tell me, like, man, I'm so glad that you reminded me or told me to put this in there because I would have forgot to say this. And so really, and then my big thing is I don't care about dads just signing up to write the letter. Like we're talking about finished letters here, and so I really want to help dads finish the letter. And so going through this process, it simplifies it. And
I can see the benefit too, Blake, even though how all this came about was tragic, and that you got this letter after your dad had passed. I see the benefits and the bonding that can come from a son or daughter or both reading this letter while they're both still alive, and how much closer that could bring that relationship as well.
Oh, yeah. I just got a text from a guy the other day, so he gave it to his daughters, the letters on Valentine's Day. So he's actually a CEO of a local company here in Tulsa. So he bought my program for all of their employees and had me come in and speak. And then we helped them write the letter, but he gave it to his daughters, who one's 19 and one is 22. Now, of course, when he gives it to them and they get this letter, he told me that they started off like, okay, I'm going to read it right now. And then they started reading and like, okay, Dad, I got to go in the bedroom. And then they came back with tears in their eyes. And he said, I could tell our relationship changed after that. He said they had been a little bit, Dad's kind of the rules guy, but then he writes this letter and they get to see his heart, like how much he loves them and cares for them. And then it just changed the relationship. And
you bring that up, and it's interesting because I broke this news to everybody, including my wife. This would have been probably a year or so ago. We were all just sitting around at my in-laws for a holiday meal, and somebody had said something about writing a book. And they said, I don't know, has anybody else written a book? And I said, I've started one. And I mean, you could have heard a pin drop. It's like, wait, and especially my wife, her jaw hits the floor. She goes, what do you mean you've started a book? And so I pull out my phone, and this is what I think it's cool, is I have this book called A Father's Story. Well, and I couldn't read it. They said, well, read it a little bit. And I said, well, I'll try to get through as much as I can. Well, my father's story that I was writing was really pointed towards my daughter, who at the time was having some real struggles. I mean, like serious struggles with alcohol and drugs. And I was struggling at the same time as her father, thinking that I had disappointed my heavenly Father in how I had raised her, to run into this wall. And so I'm writing my thoughts about all of that. Now, it's different than the letter you're talking about people writing, but I could see where, man, if you really dig deep, way down in there, and you're coming up with these thoughts because you love your children more than anything and differently than your wife. You love your spouse, but on this different level than your children. And if you think about God being our Heavenly Father, and I mentioned this the other day, I love my kids, but you know what? I have no idea how many hairs they have on their head.
Right.
But my Father knows, God knows how many hairs I have on my head. That's how much He loves me. And so I see where you could really go deep into some thoughts with the letter, and I love the whole idea. I think it's a great idea for every father, for every child. And you had mentioned that you've had authors and some other people. You even mentioned you've had guys who play in the NFL who have gone through this.
Yeah, this is kind of a cool story. So when we first started, so we're starting off, I told my wife, I was like, hey, this is what God's calling me to do. And she's looking at me like, well, we got 3 kids at home. How are you going to you're going to provide for our family by helping dads write a letter? Mm-hmm. It's like, well, this is what God's calling me to do. So we'll, He'll take care of us. And so starting off, it's a for-profit business. So I had to figure out a way to bring in revenue. And so it was kind of rocky the first couple months, but some good things were starting to happen. And then I prayed one week. I said, God, would you just do something amazing this week? I don't know what it is, but do something amazing. Well, then the next day I'm watching TV, and I see this documentary about Kyler Murray. And so I'm watching, and all of a sudden they show a video clip of him in high school throwing this game-winning touchdown pass. And I recognized the video clip. It was my video clip. So I was like, what in the world? Because I'd gone to a high school game of his in 2013 and put it up on YouTube, completely forgot about it. Yeah. Well, so I emailed Arizona Cardinals. And I say, hey, you guys used a clip of mine without my permission. I need someone to call me immediately. So the next day, I get an email saying, Tim Delaney will call you tomorrow. And I'm like, Tim Delaney? I look it up. He's the vice president of the Arizona Cardinals. So he calls me, and we hit it off like 10 minutes. We're just talking about whatever. And then he was like, oh, yeah, we got to talk about this video. And he said, how much money do you want for that video? I said, man, I don't know. How much, do you normally pay? And he's like, well, how about $400? I was like, shoot. I mean, I wasn't expecting anything, to be honest. Right. So I was like, I'll take $400. And I told him about what I was doing with fathers. And I said, I would love to just honestly interview if you can set me up with an interview with one of the players. He's like, man, absolutely. We get off the call, and I'm like, sweetie, isn't this really cool what God did? And then I felt it, like God wanted to do even more with it. And so I emailed Tim back, and I said, Tim, I told you I'm on a mission to help 1 million dads write their letter. How would you feel about being one of the 1 million? I'll personally help you write this letter. And I was kind of nervous. He emails me back almost immediately. Absolutely, that'd be fantastic. And so awesome. Yeah, I got to help Tim, and then that led to me some other people in the Cardinals organization write their letter. Mm-hmm. Tim's a great dad. He's got a 12-year-old daughter, and so he got to write this daughter for her 13th birthday.
Yeah.
And so he told me it was one of the most impactful things he's ever been through, him personally. And that's what I hear from a lot of dads. Like the letter is for your kids, but man, kind of as you were talking about doing the things that you're writing for your daughter, like to stop and reflect and to really spend that time, be very intentional and think about your children and what you want to, the advice you want to share with them and communicate your love to them. Like it impacts you as a dad.
Yeah. Well, and so many times that's the beauty of when you're stepping out in faith and you are doing something for Christ and you think you're doing this for someone else, and then afterward you see where you were the one that was blessed. Honestly, it happens like I go to church on Wednesday nights, a lot of us do, and it's a struggle sometimes to get there. But then I remember every single time I've gone afterward, I'm so glad that I went. And so I pushed through, the idea of what I could do at home if I would stay as opposed to go. And then I'm so blessed. And this seems like such a great, I'm going to go through the program. I have to. I will tell you, I took your online quiz and I aced it.
Oh, boom.
But here's what I noticed about the quiz. That's my thinking about what kind of father I've been. I wonder if my kids would answer those the same way. Just because I think I've been this, spiritual leader guy doesn't mean that they see it that way. So I'd be interested to know if they took it, what they thought of,
Yeah, I sometimes when I speak, I'll ask dads, okay, what are the first 3 words that come to your mind to describe your dad? It's like, okay, and then you think through the first 3 words, and then I'm saying, okay, what if I went to your children? What are the first 3 words that they would come up with? And so it's interesting, you start thinking about that. But then I say, you know what? You're still on this planet, so whatever the 3 words you want your children to say about you, you still have time to go be that dad. And so you can be, maybe you're not the dad that you want to be for your children, but you can rewrite the story. You can still, it's never too late to be a great dad for your children.
I remember when my son was a toddler, and I don't know if you remember, you could buy these NFL helmets out of bubblegum machines.
I remember that.
Replica helmets. Yep. And so at the time, you couldn't just go buy the whole set somewhere. And so every time I would see one of those bubblegum machines, I would, get him a helmet and hope that it was one he didn't already have. Well, eventually, I got all 32 teams in the NFL. And so we videotaped him. He would have been about 3. And he had this, fun little lisp in his voice, and he called the Rams the Whams. And so we videotape him going through every helmet and naming every team in the NFL and how
good.
Proud I was. And then it was like, okay, now let's do the books of the New Testament. And he couldn't get past the Gospels. And I thought, that's not right. there's a bad dad element, or a disappointing dad, I guess. But I recognized that anyway and thought, okay, I need to make some changes in what's a priority for him to learn. But
well, good for you. And the thing is, we all become dad. When we become dads, it's not like you've ever been a dad before. So
right.
We're all kind of learning on the go. Yeah. And so writing the letter is one thing that a dad can do to get some training. Yes, we're writing a letter and it's going to impact our children, but it also, gets you some good training to think through, okay, this is the values that I am trying to, teach my children.
All right, before you go again, how can our listeners get involved?
They go to legacyletterchallenge.com, and there's a couple different options to sign up. Every month I'm leading a group of dads through it live on Zoom, so you can jump on. This is how you should do it, Kevin. Jump on with me live.
Okay.
And then there's some the online version as well.
Very good. My thanks to Blake Brewer for being a guest on this episode of Suit Up. I encourage all dads to take the Legacy Letter Challenge like me. Look for more inspiring podcasts on Suit Up, and please give us a 5-star rating.